Hello friends out there in YouTube land or however else you found me. I'm Robert Hamm with Robert Hamm Photography, and I'm here today to talk about the Fuji X100 series, specifically to give you a real quick course in Fuji X-Trans sensor technology. And really what brought about this video is the announcement of the Fuji X100F and how excited I am about it, and I want to share with you some of that excitement. Before we move into that, I just want to let you know I am a wedding photographer here on the East Coast. I service everywhere from Miami all the way up to New York City. I'm based out of Hampton Roads. And if you'd like to find out a little bit more about weddings, you can find my 5 pro tips, 1-minute pro tips. Use them wisely. And it's just a little bit of information to help you out. Also, I have a great philosophy on just shooting film, how to shoot better, shoot film. And it's an open letter to my friends and readers and you guys out there. And it just shares a little bit of information about slowing down. This whole article right here is written with the idea that everyone can produce great work, but it doesn't happen from spray and pray. So just a little bit of food for thought. If you'd like, head on over here. I only have a few likes on it so far, so give it a thumbs up, give it a tweet, and give it a share. Go over to my YouTube channel and you can find all kinds of information. I've got over 100 videos on everything from my morning meeting videos where I am talking about everything about how to be successful in photography as a business, where I have my different playlists like creative projects, what's in my bag, all about photo booths, camera gear and reviews, all kinds of cool stuff. And if you want to know about how to use Lightroom and batch edit photos and stuff like that, guess what, guys? You can find it all there. Without further ado, let's get started. The place where we really want to begin to understand Fuji and their search for a sensor and a better sensor is Cambridge in Color. This is an absolutely excellent resource. Your camera, if you don't know, your cell phone and your camera, it does not see in color. It actually sees in black and white. Interpolation of color happens through a filter that's placed over top of the image, and over top of the sensor, like you see here. It's a translucent filter. It's basically just wires, little tiny wires, that allow the camera's processor to interpolate the data and then take that value that it gets from 0 to 255 and give it a color assignment. So it depends on how they're implementing it, and this was the original type of array. There's plenty of different types out there. Just go out there and check it out. But realistically, the filter is a physical object that goes over top of your camera sensor, and it's in a pattern that looks like this. This is called the bear pattern. If you look green, red, green, red, green, red, blue, green, blue, green, blue, green. When we look at our bear filter, right, we see this pattern that overlays over and over again. And so this little part right here is actually great. This is over on Wikipedia. So you can see exactly what the camera is doing. This is important to know because the scene, as you see it, the camera sees it in black and white. It interpolates the data from the filter array and then composes the image based on the color array using the values it gets from black and white, the intensity values. And that's really important to know. But we don't want to go ahead and continue and just think that that's the only array. Kodak actually came up with several different arrays back in 2007 that were alternatives to the Bear array. None of them really took off because the Bear array was licensed, everybody was using it, and it was a very good array. The problem with the Bear array is that you can end up with patterns that repeat having some moire. And so you're going to have to demosaic and have an anti-aliasing filter that comes on there, which slightly blurs the image so that lines that are very close together or patterns that are very close together don't cause that swirly moire pattern. When we look over here, we also see that Fujifilm came out with the idea of this EXR filter. Now, I had a camera with this EXR filter in it. It was the Fujifilm S7000 back in 2004, and it was the Generation 4 Super CCD. And I'm going to show you a picture of that in a second, but it had pixels arranged in an octagon pattern and on a diagonal, which is pretty cool. And that was also something to help improve skin tones and give dynamic range a boost. Very important there. We're going to learn in just a second what some subpixels were with that. And then here today, this is the X-Trans filter that is being used currently. I'm going to open up this and come back to it in a minute. As we continue on, we see that the Super CCD, like we were talking about, Fuji left the EXR sensor and went to a Bear filter in 2010 for about 1 year and then developed the X-Trans sensor. But prior to doing that, when they were using the Super CCD, the image that your camera would see was this. Notice that it saw 2 images. That's because each photo site had 2 photocells on it, a photodiode and then a smaller luminosity transistor that was on there. And that transistor was based on a 45, and this is what the camera saw. And the reason that that was important is because it allowed for the camera, in this arrangement right here, with these subpixels that are based on a 45-degree angle, to interpolate a much more high dynamic range image and additional values. What ended up happening was Fuji decided to build a new sensor later on, and that sensor technology that came out of the Super CCD technology is actually the X-Trans sensor. Now remember, the Super CCD technology is technology going up through 2010. 2011 is when we see the X-Trans sensor come in. So let's look at that. As the X-Trans sensor comes in, instead of having a red-green repeating, a green-red, a green-blue, a red-blue, a red-green, the the X-Trans sensor looked at film, silver halide film, and saw that the actual molecules of silver halide, the silver sulfates that were in there, were actually arranged in different sizes and at a very different randomized rate. So what Fuji did was they created a different kind of 6x6 pixel array. As you can see here, green is still represented as the most color, just like you see here, except for all the other colors are randomized on here a little bit better. Now this pattern, when done over the course of 16 million pixels, allows for the less likelihood of any mosaicing. And you can see how they have arranged them in the Fuji X-Trans array compared to the bare filter. That allows you to get rid of the anti-aliasing filter, which means, remember, that anti-aliasing filter was a filter which slightly blurs the image. So with the bare filter, in order to make sure that you're getting rid of the little lines in the moire patterns that you would show up, you'd add that anti-aliasing filter. Switching to this X-Trans sensor with an X-Trans filter on top of it, this filter here, allowed for getting rid of the anti-aliasing filter, which also meant your pictures would be sharper. So what is the importance of that with the X100 series? Well, when we look at our X100 series, we see that the series itself started with the X100. Now, this is a 12 megapixel camera that was a really solid camera. Came out right in announced in 2010, produced for production in February of 2011, and it had a couple of really nice elements to it. Number one was an 8-element 6-group lens, and that lens is an f2. It also had a 9-bladed aperture. It had a flash synchronization speed because of a leaf shutter up to f2, up to 1/1000th of a second. And you could continue to sync higher if your aperture was a little bit smaller. But even at f2, syncing at 1/1000th of a second, that meant that your film or your camera was able to sync with the flash 3, possibly even 4 times faster than most cameras on the market then. And when we look at the camera, we'll see something that it came out with what would be seen as this nice little retro design. But what was more important than the retro design was that they were placing the controls in areas where photographers were used to, right? So when we look at this right here, we see that the camera was actually created in such a way that we would use the shutter speed. We would go ahead and use the aperture dial. And that's great, and that allowed us to have more control over the types of images which we were creating. The next camera to come out is the beautiful Fujifilm X100s. Now, the nice part about this is it maintained the focal length of the 23mm lens, f2, 8 elements in 6 groups, right, with one aspherical element. But what it did was it introduced, this is the first part with the X-Trans 2 sensor. And that means that this camera right here has that special sensor like we were talking about just a few minutes ago. With the X100s, autofocus times were greatly improved over the X100, but there was still room for improvement over the next couple of years. In fact, Fuji has continued to support all of their X100 series all the way up to the X100t, and now we've got the X100F coming out. And that's pretty interesting. So when we look at this, we see that this camera is now more of a revolutionary upgrade with a new processor, as well as additional speed with its actual processor and sensor combination. Things that maintain a staple of the X100 series are the high-speed autofocus, as well as the very quick flash synchronization, the leaf shutter, the neutral density filter built in, and that hybrid viewfinder. Well, what we see happening with the X100t, the second generation out right now, is that Fuji continued to improve. This is more evolutionary than revolutionary. What we got was a new electronic shutter up to 1/32,000th of a second, rather than just a mechanical shutter at 1/4000th of a second. We got a picture in a picture, a little peeping way to get focus right here, as you can see. Now this focus area right here, this focus area actually pops up in the screen as you see it right here. And that allows us to be able to use the optical viewfinder with bright view lines and still maintain manual focus or check our focus with autofocus, which is really great. The sensor remained the same and the processor remained the same, but additional software was added to allow for real-time parallax correction, which is really cool. Otherwise, when shooting with the X100S, the frame is in the center of the frame, and it's only after you acquire focus does the box move. So it is more indicative of the Nikon nod, as you might say. Here, you can actually see your focus, your exposure area change as you're focusing manually, which is really cool. Some things that remain the same, definitely are the dials and the layout of the dials and the placement. We did get an upgrade from +1 or 2 stops all the way to +3 stops, which was great. And they added some film simulation modes. All in all, this was more of a evolutionary update than a revolutionary update. And when we continue on over to the X100F, this is what I'm most excited about. We're now using that brand new sensor, the X-Trans 3 processor, which is up to 24.3 million pixels. The camera still maintains the same features that are core to Fujifilm's X series DNA and that make it an excellent camera. But we have an upgraded image sensor. Also, we have an upgraded image processor. With those come an upgrade in ISO sensitivity, which is absolutely great, and we have some additional film simulation modes. But what remains the same is the attention to detail, specifically with our dials. Now, our dials are nice. We still have our aperture right here in 1/3 clicks on the ring itself. We also have plus and minus up to 5 stops, plus and minus up to 3, but in the custom mode right there, we can go up to 5. And we have access to our ISO directly on the top plate of the camera. This is really exciting, and that's a feature taken directly from the X Pro 2, and I like that. When we look at it together, Fuji has made this revolutionary jump in the camera, but been able to keep its core values of what makes an X series, X100 series camera so enjoyable. One thing that's really neat about this is that the camera itself, having that upgraded processor and having that upgraded sensor, now offers a very usable digital teleconverter. And what that means is that although the camera sensor itself is 24 megapixels, you can zoom in JPEG mode, right, to the equivalent of a 50 millimeter and a 70 millimeter crop. Now, the nice thing about that is that it still maintains the detail at 100%. And the reason that it can do that is because when you zoom into what would be a 70 millimeter crop on a 24 megapixel sensor, you get, guess what, around 16 megapixels of usable space. And if we recall, 16 megapixels is what Fuji had been using in their X-Trans 2 processors. So using the digital teleconverter on this camera would be very similar to what would have happened had Fuji decided to make a 70 millimeter equivalent fixed lens camera on a 16 megapixel sensor. Of course, if you use the 50 millimeter equivalent digital teleconverter, you're closer to like 19 megapixels, 18 megapixels, maybe 20 megapixel sensor. Now, Fuji hasn't released exactly all the information about how it's done, but if you didn't know, Fuji and Sony are now working together. Sony is producing Fuji's sensors. They are Fuji design sensors, but Sony is producing them. The reason that I can say that this digital teleconverter works without having this in my hand to use it is because Sony has had that digital teleconverter technology on their sensors since the A77. I was using it when I was shooting with an A77. It also is on the A77 Mark II. It's the clear image teleconverter, and it works an absolute treat. And it works the exact same way that we talked about. It takes a 24 megapixel image and it'll zoom into about 16 megapixels on that 24 megapixel crop. And because it's zooming into that, it's able to focus more processing power on those 16 megapixels in order to ensure that you get a really great image. If you didn't know, Sony's been producing sensors for a long time for Nikon and Canon. A couple years ago, they started producing sensors for Olympus. Interestingly enough, when Sony started producing sensors for Olympus, Sony actually bought, I think, a 12% stake in Olympus and received some proprietary technology, specifically in-body image stabilization. Now, what do we see on Sony cameras? exceptional in-body image stabilization, which comes directly from Olympus cameras. They pioneered that technology, and we see that taking place at the same time as their in lens stabilization. Panasonic had already jumped on the boat and actually is the leader in that, so that's pretty cool to know, food for thought. So that's the way that I assume this is working. However, if it turns out that Fuji announces in their product manual, once it comes out, because they haven't put it out yet, I haven't been able to read it, that there are smoke and mirrors inside of it and a magic bunny, well then you'll just have to forgive me for my speculation here. But that's how I think it works. Guys, this has been a nice long overview, supposed to be a short overview, but I wanted to give you an idea of what happened with Fuji and how they came to the X-Trans sensor. It is absolutely amazing that this company has continued to pioneer a better way to take photos. You have to understand, everybody else stuck with the norm. They stuck with the bare filter array. That's it. Even Kodak couldn't get their 3 alternative filter arrays to work. But Fuji strived for greatness. Among giants, they stepped tall, and they have won. The X-Trans sensor is absolutely amazing. I enjoy using my X-Trans 2 sensors on all of my Fuji cameras, and I look forward to getting this X100F. Guys, I'm Robert Hamm, once again with Robert Hamm Photography. We've been talking about the Fujifilm X100 series. I hope you enjoy it. The most important thing to get out of this is to drop a comment. If this video helped you, if you found it useful, if it was enjoyable to you, please leave a like, subscribe, and a comment down below. I'd love to hear from you. And as always, thank you for watching, and keep shooting, my friends.